Great. Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're in meeting 3. This TRM season is flying by. Thanks for all the feedback and the review that you've already done. We really appreciate it. It helps to get things fine-tuned on our end before we get to the very end of the process when everything gets a little crazy and time crunched. So thank you, and more review yet to come, please. If you have time, we always appreciate more eyes on the process. Okay, if you don't already have our contact information and need it, Lauren and I are accessible here via email anytime. Do make sure at least Lauren is on the email. However, she and I will bat things back and forth. So likely we'll both see it, but Lauren's the keeper of all organizational things. Similar schedule today. I wanted to start with some circle back items from last week to provide a little bit of clarity and some change that we're thinking about. Otherwise, similar schedule. Starting with the TRMAC membership. Lauren, did we have any changes that you wanted to note on this list, or mostly the same?
Yeah, I would say mostly the same. We had 2 new people. I'm not going to call them out specifically, but if they want to come off mute and introduce themselves, I think that would be great. So if you've emailed me within the past month about joining the TRMAC and you want to come off mute and talk about yourself, feel free to do that. And then I know we also have some folks who are subbing in on some other organizations. So if those folks want to come off mute and introduce themselves, that would be great. But again, no pressure. And I'll wait I don't know, 10 seconds.
Yeah, I can go. Hi, my name is Nick Campbell. I work on behalf of Frontier Energy in their software department, and I work on creating calculators based on the Minnesota TRM measures and the calculations on the TRM.
Hi, my name is Samir Keshman, and I'm subbing in for Carl Shanta this week while he's on vacation. And my role is primarily with the research and evaluations group in our team.
Great. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Kevin Hatcher, Minn Kota Power Cooperative, the member programs coordinator, oversee the SIP and our value of electricity program in our Minn Kota Power territories. Great to meet everyone.
Kevin.
And Lucas Rocha, Excel Energy, also was looped in by Carl Schlant. I oversee our electric vehicle portfolio across all of our states.
Okay.
Awesome. I appreciate that. I appreciate those introductions. But I think we can continue on, Jenna.
Thanks. Nice to have you all. Okay, we're in meeting 3. We have on the calendar right now 4 official whole TRMAC meetings on the calendar. Unlikely to add another one just because I think we don't have enough time. We do have our working group for new construction scheduled for this Thursday. The invitation has gone out, so if you would like to be a part of that and you don't have that invitation, please let Lauren know and we will include you. There's a few different new construction priority items on our list this year that we felt like we needed to just sort of have the brains together to discuss direction on a few of the things. So that's what we're planning for Thursday. No real agenda other than just to hash out what we can and report back to the main group in meeting 4. Thank you for the suggestion on the working group for MNV protocols. We do plan on doing that. We have not yet organized it. I will have a slide later that reminds me, but if you would like to be part of a working group on the MNV protocols, which exist outside of the TRM, which we've distributed around in years prior, but we haven't landed on a finalized version. Do reach out to Lauren. We'll get that scheduled likely in September at this point, early September, hopefully. And again, hopefully to kind of circle back and report in meeting 4 on where we land there. It might, both of those working groups might require another working group after them if we have time. I think both of the main deliverables, if you will, that we're looking for those 2 groups are likely to exist outside of the TRM. So they aren't necessarily tied to the same regulatory schedule, although it would be convenient if they could move forward in the process with the TRM through the regulatory process. But we'll see where they land and if we're feeling comfortable as a group with them at the end of this process. Schedule, I think we have some relatively firm dates. I'm not sure they've really changed since our last meeting, but if you need them to put them on your calendar, here they are. We're hopeful to get this process fully wrapped up before the end of this calendar year. That's worked in the last couple of years, so we're aiming for it this year again. Links, I won't talk about these. They're in every PowerPoint if you need them. Links to these two main directory points. For those of you who are new, do take a look to make sure you can access this collaboration SharePoint site. It's an invite-only thing. So if you're struggling with that or not gaining access, let Lauren know and we can sort it out. That's where some of our draft workbooks and work papers and the draft TRM will live until we get into the formal regulatory process. Here's another slide on just kind of generally what it looks like. Lauren, did you want to jump in on any card research, or are you okay to let this sort of live as a
So this slide is unchanged since our last meeting, which is lovely. So you can just kind of keep track of existing card research and recently completed card research. But if you want to jump to the next slide, we recently announced, I believe, 21 card projects. So these are the card projects, who the grantee is, the title of the projects, the status, and the completion date. So feel free to take a look at those. If you would like to get on a distribution list where you receive communication from the Minnesota Department of Commerce, that would include stuff like, oh, hey, we have an RFP out for card projects, or we're recently announcing card projects, and you're not already on that distribution list, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I can get you connected to that list. But yeah, take a look at those. We will be tracking, many of these relate to the technical reference manual, so we'll be tracking this research and then incorporating the research as it is finalized.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the dates. It looks like a lot of these might close up before our 6.0 process concludes. So hopeful to incorporate as much as we can into the TRM where it's relevant. Okay, jumping into updates, starting with some circle back items, two in particular that we received some feedback and requests for clarification on. So I wanted to start with that and make sure we're clear on them. Sorry for the heartburn that this one probably caused people. Just to back up to what we were originally trying to do with this one. We were looking to make sure that we didn't have anything in direct contradiction with programs that were either in existence through the state or likely to launch soon. Where we have in the past, it's been minor things, but it's caused some customer confusion and some contractor confusion as to what the performance standards are and what the scope is. And the last thing we wanted to do is sow confusion amongst parties or undercut other programs. So the directive here was to sort of make sure we had alignment with particularly the HOMES and the HERE program and also the WAP program, the weatherization program. And the only area that we had divergence was on the HSPF2 performance metrics, specifically to the air source heat pump on the res side. And we were proposing a change upward in that measure. However, the more we talk with the program, all of those programs, it seems like the launch date is increasingly unclear and seems to keep moving backward. I think to a degree that at this point, it's probably likely that those performance standards might even change before those programs actually launch. So the very last thing we want to do is make an arbitrary change that we then are kind of chasing. So given all of the things that would need to change, not just with your programs, which is huge, but the modeling that was done for those related measures and all of the related measures that have the same performance standards specified, it's looking like it's increasingly not worthwhile as long as those programs are still have an unclear launch date. So just know that we will probably revisit that once we do have a clear launch date and we do have final performance metrics being indicated for those programs as they come online. Again, the goal is to not have contradicting performance standards or scope or anything that might cause confusion amongst Minnesota utility or Minnesota driven programs. But at this point, I think this would be creating more problems than solving. So new proposal is to make no changes to the performance metrics for res air source heat pump, particularly HSPF2, which we were discussing at our last meeting. Again, sorry for the heartburn that probably caused and the about face on that, not our normal MO. Electric vehicles. I think I jumped into this one in phase 2, and I should have started from the beginning on what we were doing in this measure. And the first part of this is we haven't touched this measure since 4.0 when we put it out there, and we knew that it's a changing market for these vehicles and changing data behind the metrics we have in the measure. So we wanted to take a look at reanalyzing, making sure everything still made sense and was current. So phase 1 of this has been planned for a while, and it's updating the foundational metrics behind the electric vehicles measure. Specifically reanalyzing the 2026 PUC registration data, looking at quantity of cars, how many of them are really residential versus commercial, and if there's a change in that ratio that we need to take into account for maybe splitting this measure into 2. And if the efficiency of the vehicle mix is dramatically changing, do we want to make updates to that kWh per mile metric that's kind of foundational? So I did that. And there's tremendous growth in that registration list, which is really awesome to see. There's like a 400% increase over the last 5 years. And it's more in EVs than PHEVs. EVs was about 2/3 of the list prior, and now it's about 75%, which is expected. And it's also expected that we saw a reduction in the kWh per mile, so an increase in the efficiency of the mix of cars that are registered to that list. So I made a couple changes to our metrics. That new kWh per mile metric is slightly lower, which means it's less of a electric penalty on that side of the equation. Of course, the ratio between EVs and PHEVs is just an input. It's not factored into the savings. It's their own deemed values, each dependent on what the mix is in your particular utility territory. Also notice that while commercial vehicles are increasing, they increased about 2x over 5 years ago. And it's predominantly now, well, it's predominantly still smaller delivery vans, but there's a lot of larger trucks on that list as well. A lot of school buses, a lot of city buses, which is nice to see. The number relative to the number of residential vehicles is still extremely small. So I think at this point, it's still making sense to sort of keep this as one measure rather than kind of digging into the commercial side to make it its own. Just because I don't think we have quite enough data to support it. But right now, it's still less than 1% of the total list out there. We do, Lauren's been making great contacts with MDOT in the last, MnDOT, I should say, in the last few years. And we have some new research from them, which was dedicated to Minnesota. So we're feeling pretty good about kind of the scope of some of those values. And we have a new vehicle miles traveled metric weighted by rural and urban, specifically looking at miles traveled in jurisdictions. And we're inclined to use that metric, and it's higher than the version 5.0, I'm sorry, 4.0 analysis that we had. And so that generally just increases both sides of the equation and results in net much higher EFS savings for both EVs and PHEVs. I'll note that there was an error in the PHEV algorithm, specifically on the gasoline side, that when I correct that error, in fact, the savings decrease very slightly for PHEVs, but they increase significantly for EVs, and that is predominantly what's out there. So hopefully that doesn't cause too much issue with your programs, but blended together, weighted, it's 32% increase overall in EFS savings for that measure. So hopefully that's good news. And of course, the electric side of that is carried into the EV charging sales measure, separate thing. But given the vehicle miles traveled and the increase in, well, the increase in efficiency drops it a bit, but the net result on KWH is a 34% increase on EVs and 18% increase on PHEVs. That's what can be subtracted from based on the sales. Again, two separate things, but connected entirely in terms of the math behind that. We were additionally considering, and I'm interested in your feedback on this, on splitting the measure, either one or both of the measures into urban and rural, just because we noticed a significant difference in the vehicle miles traveled between rural and urban areas based on that data. But we're feeling like that's probably adding more cumbersome documentation than is really valuable for the measure. We're interested in your feedback on that, but right now we've kind of circled back around to leaving it as one weighted average value, unless we receive strong opinions on it. That's where we're landing. So, okay, so that's phase one. That was always planned. Phase two has come up in the last 6 months or so, based on feedback from utilities that are seeking to support the market of EVs, like collectively, and we're trying to find a way to recognize that EVs are not just themselves, they are supported by the network of infrastructure around them. It's the chargers on the road, different types, different locations. It's the chargers in the home, also different types. It's the vehicles themselves, which is perhaps the easiest portion to quantify. And then you have just the complexity of this concept in general, because it's a non-distributed fuel switching to a distributed grid fuel. There's fuel switch going on, and then it's charging and registered to one specific jurisdiction, and then you can charge it anywhere. Neighboring jurisdictions, you can have people passing through charging at chargers, and so there's just a lot of unknowns and complication with this technology. So there's definitely no one correct way to do it, but the way we had decided upon in 4.0 was to have all of the EFS savings live on the measure itself for the electric vehicle, because that's where the fuel switch is technically happening. I think as we've lived with this for the last 4 years, and we collectively, utilities, everyone, stakeholders to this process, there arises a potential issue where we don't want to dictate necessarily where the EFS savings are, and thus where the incentives can be claimed when so many things support the growth of this particular technology. And so we're trying to find a way to open that up a bit so that utilities have some levers to pull, have some different options as to where to claim savings, and thus where to put some, incentive dollars to drive the growth of this area, which is the goal. So we're batting ideas around, to be quite honest, and we haven't landed on where we would like to go with this. We are definitely looking for feedback on it. Our original idea, which is still probably the one that we're running with at this point, although we have other irons in the fire of options, which we are not yet ready to talk about with you guys, but we will loop you in as other options might arise. But where we're going right now is to try to split off some of the savings of the EV measure and attribute it to public chargers. And I want to be clear because I was not clear last meeting, and I'm sorry about that. The two are connected in theory. They are not connected directly in math because it's just different metrics. We can't directly quantify the two. What we have is registered vehicles for the EV measure, and what we have is just KWH data for chargers, public chargers on the road. And the two just, in theory, 60-ish% of the charging happens at home on average. 40-ish% of the charging happens on the road. And that is all that connects the two measures. But we would seek to add kind of a reduction factor on the EV vehicle measure. And I'll note that this is after the increase. With the decrease, it's probably going to come out to about the same EFS savings on that electric vehicle measure. You can pursue it the way you're pursuing it now. Nothing needs to change. Nothing additional needs to happen to claim savings for that measure. Separately, there is a electric vehicle charger measure for public on-road chargers that we are hoping to, we have yet to have the data in hand, but once we have Minnesota utility data from a couple different utilities of on-road chargers, we're hoping to analyze that and come up with a deemed KWH per charger metric at this point, irrespective of location, irrespective of type of charging, just per charger per year. And probably 100% of that KWH is considered EFS savings. I think we know that there's a lot of charging that happens that isn't the registered vehicle in the utility territory and the charger that's in the utility territory. It's not necessarily going to equal 100%. It's people will charge in neighboring utility territories. People will be coming through the utility territory who don't live here at all that are charging. And so in reality, there's probably a reduction adjustment factor that we need to add to the charger to shave off some of that. But I think unless we have direct data to quantify it, we're just going to leave it pretty simple for now. So that's the plan. Again, we have yet to even tackle this measure or analyze the data behind it, but that's sort of the intention with that one. And I think I created some heartburn thinking, indicating that the two are connected in math. They are connected in theory, but not in math. And so hopefully you can continue to pursue the EV measure and you could ignore this new measure if you'd like to, or you can pursue both, or you could sue one or the other. And there's not going to be additional documentation that you need to do to connect the two. Get back to us if you have some feedback on that or if it's still unclear. I realize it's unclear because it's still in theory and we haven't put that second measure in front of you yet. But once we have a little bit more information physically from those chargers, we can distribute that probably in advance of the next meeting so you can have time to noodle on that and get back to us. Lauren, I'm not monitoring the chat. Is there anything that's come in related to this or any prior topic that we should pause on?
No, not on this topic, but Nick Heed, and I'm not sure if I pronounced your last name correctly. You introduced yourself in the chat, so just wanted to call that out. That is the only comment that we have so far.
Okay, do get back to us, guys. I know this is kind of a mess of a measure. It always was. This technology is just not as simple as like a boiler upgrade in a building that doesn't move location. So we're trying to work with it as best we can and support it. Okay, edits made to date. And it occurs to me running through this list, I think I will create from these slides a running list of what's been changed so that you have it if you want to look back rather than having to open up all of the past presentations. You can have just a Word document that has all of this information included on it. So I will get that over to Lauren to incorporate into her email out to you guys soon. Circling back on a couple things, we had introduced changes made to particularly the dryers measure on the res sign. And we've made some additional modifications to that, make it hopefully significantly more clear the baseline definitions for some of the new equipment that we're allowing to be eligible, the laundry centers, which are separate drums, but sort of a connected unit. And then the all-in-one units, which are a single drum serving two functions, and how you are to kind of classify them and what baseline you're to use against those units. There's also a lot of references that were sort of unused and unlinked from original versions of this measure that we cleaned up a bit. So some additional modifications to that one, nothing major changed in it, hopefully just clarification to it. And that is in the tracked changes of the master TRM, which is a large document. Since I've made so many changes to these two in particular, I've moved these workbooks out of the finals folder and into the draft ready for review folder, just so that they don't get missed. With the washers, we had tied a few things between the two just because those two units are applicable to both of those measures. So similar clarifications as to definitions made in the measure descriptions of those. Additionally, we had specified version 9.0 for Energy Star. I think it was last because it looked like it was about to be published. And that appears to have gone back into the review cycle unexpectedly. So given that, we've reverted back to 8.1, just because we know that several entities, but I think particularly CAUs, have streamlined the process of Energy Star appliances measures to just require Energy Star qualification to be eligible equipment, and we don't want to create a situation unintentionally where we're requiring an Energy Star qualification to a standard that is not in effect. So slight reverse there. Hopefully it does clear through the approval process and we can update it back to 9.0 in the next version of the TRM or whenever that happens. But that is a change we made to that measure backward, unusually. Air source heat pump measure. We talked about a lot of M1 mods last meeting. I've now incorporated those same mods into Appendix G calculation. There were a couple scenarios baseline to performance that were based upon the calculation rather than the model. So those deemed savings are now recalculated with the different M1 metrics in there. All of that has also been incorporated into the written TRM. So just a few changes to Appendix G if you have a minute to take a look through that, particularly the Excel calculation portion of it. And then I created a measure work paper, but rather than creating a separate workbook for it, I just incorporated yet another tab into the Appendix G spreadsheet. Just because it's all related. It didn't seem like it was worthwhile to have separate ones. So take a look at that if that's useful. Still, most of the calculation happens within Appendix G if you're calculating it out. Nothing with the models has changed. All of those deemed values, most of the scenarios deemed values are based on the model. That's now all of those deemed savings have been migrated over into the written TRM. So that's done. Last one here in an effort to, again, align with programs and practices, not just performance specifications, but like the scope practices, standards of work. We're trying to kind of close some gaps here. And with the weatherization program, we wanted to align with them and what they reference for standard scope, particularly with insulation and air sealing. So to the measure description of the first two residential envelope measures, we've added specific reference to following the NREL standard work specifications as what's expected for how the insulation air sealing is conducted. And I don't think that actually differs from the intention of anyone's existing programs, but just kind of closing the gap and making it abundantly clear in those two measures in particular. I did not create a workbook for those just because I wasn't really changing anything with the algorithm. And they were pretty simplistic measures to begin with. But if that's something that's really, if that would benefit anyone, let me know and I can prioritize making a workbook for that. But right now it's just edits within the master TRM. Last two res ones, we discussed these already. I just wanted to have this documented in the same table format for you all, in case this was serving as your to-do list to review. Some modifications within the draft TRM, not broken out as work papers for both of those measures. Right now, I do have that percent charging ratio metric incorporated into the algorithm of the EVs measure, but again, that's not, please don't consider that final. We're still noodling on that one, and we'll circle back in meeting 4 on the direction that we'd like to take with that, with your feedback, hopefully. I did not make a workbook for the EV charging sales measure just because it was entirely driven by the EV measure and the calculation was happening there. But if anyone would benefit from that, I would probably elect to add a tab to the EV measure workbook. But I didn't want to create something that was duplicative and confusing. So that's not made, but let me know if you'd like it to be made. Moving on from res, although I think I'll pause, Lauren, if we have any comments from anyone on res changes.
I'm not seeing any comments come in. I did note somebody was muted or unmuted. I think that was accidental, but I left them unmuted. And I'll just give them a space to speak right now if they would like to. Okay, I think we can move on. Thanks, Jenna.
Cool. CNI, just a very small change to programmable thermostats, the gas measure. I think there was an error in the algorithm that we corrected, and some of the input definitions needed a little bit of alignment between the electric measure. That was the intention, but I think they got a little confused at some point. So small modifications made to that measure in the draft, in the master draft. New measure, switch reluctance motors, and I meant to get this in front of Andy at Slipstream before today. Sorry. If you have time, we would very much appreciate your review first, although it's going to be alongside everyone else's review. It's mostly out of the Illinois TRM, so very little deviation there, although they had sort of two parts to that algorithm, the cooling savings portion and the fan savings portion. And effectively the cooling savings is zeroed out due to waiting on future research. So I just eliminated it and focused on the fan side of it, which makes it significantly more simple. And I think we'll await that future research to consider adding the HVAC cooling portion into that measure in future. But right now it's almost directly from Illinois TRM. So hopefully no surprises there. I know a couple of you guys are using that measure and referencing Illinois. So that is new workbook. And because it's new, it has a work paper and is contained in a separate folder. I didn't add it into the master TRM yet. So hopefully that makes it easier to distribute it and review it as needed. Likely to just, and this is kind of the first instance where I've been doing this, tack it on to the end of the category rather than change numbering around to move it up to the other motor related measures. This is where it's just going to get messy. But I think it's less messy to just tack it on to the end rather than change a bunch of things and sow confusion. But this is the first instance of this. Let me know if you disagree with that methodology, but that's the plan thus far. ACC, high efficiency grain dryer, is an existing measure, but we haven't looked at it in a while. Really no major changes, just some clarification to the inputs that were, to me, unclear. Expansion of some default values. I felt like it was pretty open-ended and needed a little bit of guidance in certain areas rather than leaving it as a completely open customer input. It's still an option, but I added some default values for direction in case it was necessary. Update to several of the references that were quite old. And then following some of the other TRM's method, I added kWh savings algorithm as optional if it's an electric driven gas dryer or if there's significant electrical components to a gas, apparently a gas dryer. It allows savings to be claimed in both fuel types if it's applicable to the situation. Appendix G, some small changes there. We've been working on heat rates for electric generation in a separate project, the card load shapes project, that it felt like that was a missing element of Appendix F that I wanted to get added in there. I think I just added a column in the first table to address some of that. I think particularly as the nuclear heat rate differs from what we are otherwise referencing in that appendix, which is generally EPA, which gives a different heat rate. But in one of the EFS legislation documents from the state, it referenced a different number. So I wanted to make sure that that was tied together with Appendix F. Also, I think we only had MRO at the subregion level and the emissions metrics behind it. And I wanted to add MRO at the state level, which is better emissions values, and also something we're referencing in the card work. So just to kind of close the loop on all of that, I added a few things to Appendix F. I believe I've left Appendix F in the finals folder, if you're looking for that. Yeah, I think I did. But that's changed a little bit, and it's also it's in the written draft TRM if you're looking for those modifications. Finally, steam trap repair, and I think I've been looking at this one too long, and so I would really appreciate the brain trust of this group. If this is a measure that's important to your program, take a look at it. I didn't take it apart, but I've just moved things around and added a lot more definition behind some of the inputs. So I didn't do this in the master draft. I did it in a standalone work paper, also expecting that this might be one that you wanted to pass along to colleagues and it would be easier to do in a 3-page work paper rather than a 1,000-page document. I did take a look at 8 other TRMs that had this same measure. No one is following exactly the same algorithm, although the concept is the same amongst nearly all of them. And I know that this is a pretty significant measure in several of the gas utilities program, just based on savings and the amount of times this shows up amongst your customer population. So I wanted to take a look at it again and just make sure we had some alignment amongst ourselves and amongst the other TRMs, and understand where we were falling in terms of the default values and what they calculated out as. And we're pretty high, although there's so many inputs into the algorithm that are customer driven that it's difficult to compare to the same extent. And I know that a lot of the utilities are using their own customer data for deemed values, which is good and likely to continue in the future. So a lot of what I did is maybe moot, but I wanted to make sure the algorithm as it stood alone doesn't calculate higher than reality should dictate. So I did make a couple changes to the inputs. I added another adjustment factor specifically to high pressure systems to kind of be a little bit more conservative on the calculation. I did remove the control multiplier. It was multiplying the savings upward 2 or 3 times. And I think the original intention behind that was to modify the EFLH hours, but the two weren't connected very well, and the EFLH is already kind of an open-ended variable. So it feels like the error is on the side of multiplying too high with that factor. in there. So I did remove that, and that does affect space heating for low pressure systems. And again, most everyone that's using this measure is sort of using their own customer values in here, so it might not be applicable, but take a look at that. All of this to say, please take a look at that measure if it's in your program. I'm very interested in your opinions and your feedback. I do have the measure in one tab, and then in the notes tab, I have kind of my, forgive me, my brain dump into it and the comparison with other TRMs, working on a similar example with similar metrics to try and understand where we land in relation to all of those resources. So that's a big one. I've been looking at it too long again, so I'm happy to pass that off to you guys for review and hopefully get some fresh eyes on it and fresh perspective. And I welcome feedback. I should have switched to this next slide. I left it here just in case we had some discussion items on it, but I think in fact it'd probably be better if you took a look at it and got back to me rather than hashing it out amongst ourselves right now, just because we're short on time. Anyway, secondary changes that I wanted to cover. So we have a line item on our priority list as kind of closing the loop on the res furnace baseline change. And one of the last actionable items we were looking to do was make sure everything, all the deemed values were corrected and to the 90% baseline for res air source heat pumps measure. With now the changes to Appendix G have been made. So crossing that off the list, the only other two things we're tracking are two measures that are modeled. Unfortunately modeled a few years ago / a model that isn't in our control. So outstanding at this point, still based on a modeled 80% baseline, are res low E storm windows and res cellular shades. I'm not sure if anyone has cellular shades in their program. I know a few of you have low E storm windows, and forgive me, I have not yet looked at the triennial plans to know if you're following the TRM method or if you have your own method for the former. So those are two things that we know we need to kind of remodel, and we haven't yet determined how we're going to do that, but it's probably a future research need to address. But I think that they're kind of a low impact, especially the second, on most of your programs. So hopefully those things can wait until next year or possibly 6.0. But if you feel strongly, or if you have your own method that you're following that could be applicable to the TRM rather than remodeling, let us know, and we'll move that up on the priority list. The last bullet point's maybe the most important. That's all we're tracking related to res baseline furnace change. If there's something else that we've missed, particularly that's in your program, or something that's buried within a measure that we're not thinking about, that we haven't already made the change to either this year or last year, please let us know. We'll get it on the priority list and make sure it gets done as soon as we possibly can. Get it done and get resources toward it. Lastly, I should have touched base on this last meeting when I was talking about some feedback from stakeholders. We had a comment in, I think it was during the regulatory process, that they thought we were missing some inputs, I think coincidence factor, as part of the ECM fan motors measure in commercial. In fact, they're there, but they're within a sub algorithm, which I don't normally like to do, but I think just the organization of that measure, it made sense to do it. We're disposed to not make sort of visual changes to that measure unless it is a point of confusion with more than one stakeholder or more than one utility group. So let us know if the organization of that algorithm doesn't make sense to anyone else, and we'll look to modify it. I just didn't want to make arbitrary changes if that was working for everyone else. But in general, I agree. don't generally like sub-algorithms within an algorithm. It gets a little confusing. But we're proposing no action there unless we have feedback from others. Last item I wanted to address, and thank you for the feedback on this one that we received recently. I think it was the last version of the TRM, we made the change to sort of remove Energy Star from titles of measures, keep it as the performance threshold for the physical metrics of whatever it is, the appliance or the piece of equipment, but drop Energy Star from the actual title of the measure, and then also drop it as a requirement, or clarify that it was not necessarily a requirement for that product to be qualified through the program. All of that was in an effort to sort of future-proof those measures. It's still unclear where Energy Star program is going, and if the qualification, the program to make products qualified through that program, if it would still be in place in the same function in years future. And so we wanted to kind of untie it a little bit and still use it as the performance metric because it's the best thing we have out there, but not necessarily tie it to having to be qualified just in case that program is not there in the same way that it is now by the time this TRM is published and active. That appears to have unintentionally caused an issue with, I think, particularly COUs that use the Energy Star qualification as kind of a streamlined approach to those measures. So the first two bullets remain true, but we've added to the description, the measure description, that while it's not required to be qualified, if utilities are looking to streamline compliance with the measures, that they can require that the eligible equipment is qualified with the current version of the specifications through Energy Star. And that applies to all of the measures that reference Energy Star as performance metrics, which is a number of them. So if that was a hang up for anyone in particular, please go to any one of those measures in the large master TRM track changes, and you'll see that kind of dropped in language. And I'm very interested in if that will solve the problem, or if further modifications, clarifications need to happen in order to allow you to follow that streamlined path without causing the issues that we were trying to mitigate before. I'm trying to have a happy medium. Let me know if it has achieved. Okay, getting to the end. Still pending updates. The list is getting shorter. We will have clarification by our next meeting on the direction with electric vehicles, particularly the public chargers portion of that problem. And something for you to review there, whether it's a public chargers measure or some other method that we're proposing. Hopefully we will get back to you before the next meeting with something to review, so we have your thoughts before it. On the res side, storm windows to air sealing measure I have in draft. I need to clarify a few things with that card team, but that should be a measure that we'll have in front of you for review at meeting 4. I think we're waiting on some primary research on a couple things from Franklin Energy on behalf of Minnesota Power. There's some air fires measures, or research rather, to maybe inform an air fires measure. I'm not sure we're going to get that in time for this version, but it's something that we're tracking on our priority list for whenever we receive it. On the commercial side, I think we're also in a holding pattern on the lighting controls updates from Minnesota ETA. Either way, that has not yet been tackled. And the last bullet on that list is something we'd like to circle back with our new construction working group on. I think there are some errors in that commercial lighting measure for new construction that we need to correct and need some feedback on. First two bullets on the commercial side, we have in draft a grocery refrigeration equipment optimization measure based on card research. I need to touch base with that card team to review it first before we put it in front of you guys, but that should be something we introduce in meeting 4. And lastly, we have not yet started. A stakeholder had recommended circulator pumps efficiency index, which to be determined if that gets incorporated into an existing measure or it's its own new measure. That's also on the list. Hoping to tackle that this version. That should mostly close up that which we like to get done. Aside from our 2 working groups, our first working group we've already discussed. It's on Thursday. If you are not involved in that, let us know if you'd like to be, and we'll invite you. Thank you for the recommendation for the M&B protocols working group. We're going to take you up on that. And if we haven't yet to schedule anything around that, if you'd like to be involved, please let Lauren know, and we will schedule probably a when to meet and then a meeting in early September around that. Again, probably the main things that we're looking for both of those working groups will live outside of the TRM for the most part. So it might be several working groups, and it may or may not be finalized in time to be part of the TRM regulatory process. But the ideal goal is that all of these things move together and get finalized. I skipped over the first bullet point. I have card research that we're doing that's very much related to the TRM that we need to schedule a separate meeting for. Sorry about these meetings happening at the same time in August as everyone's taking vacations. But we will get that on the books soon, and we'll report back to this group regardless. I think in terms of the integration of that data, we're thinking about an appendix of load shape distribution data for the applicable energy or fuel switching measures that we're kind of focused on for that work. So it's unlikely to kind of affect a lot of things in the written TRM. It's sort of going to live alone as an appendix tacked on to the end for the time being. That's something we have yet to finalize as well. And then truly lastly, some incremental costs related specifically to residential HVAC we'd like to clean up in this version of the TRM. I think we'll save the incremental cost review across the TRM for likely 6.0, although we will probably target a few things in 5.2 next year. So one more meeting left to go. We will have plenty to talk about during that meeting. There's a lot of things still on the list yet to finalize. I will make sure that I'll get Lauren a running list of everything that's been changed now that that list is lengthy, so that if you want to use it as you're jumping around in the TRM rather than just jumping around to track changes, you'll have that in hand. So hopefully that'll make it easier to review and where it's located in the SharePoint folder system. So if you have any feedback on anything we discussed today, and I'm hoping you do, please let us know via email, either Lauren or I or both. Again, we work together on almost everything. So either of us will receive it. And if there's anything that you want to add to the priority list at any time, it'll be, probably next version, unless it's something that really is impactful that needs to happen sooner rather than later. But there is no timeline in which you're cut off. Please keep the recommendations coming, and we always add it to the priority list. And it's absolutely a living document for Lauren and I that just kind of forms our to-do list going forward. So let us know if you have any pain points or anything that needs to be fixed or fleshed out or clarified. It's always useful to us. Otherwise, next steps, I think you'll receive an email from Lauren within the next day or so with a link to where this recording will be housed and the slide deck and the priority list and everything else. Lauren, any last topic on the priority list that you want to discuss?
Do you know? I'll include it in the chat so that you all have it right now, but it will be included in the follow-up email. and I do know this is it, so I'll just include it here. You're going to want to take a look at tab that is dated for today. So it's 26/08/17, just so that you have the most updated version. Awesome, and appreciate it, Jenna. Is there anything else that you want to say to close us out?
No, I don't think so. No.
Okay.
Happy
Well,
to hear from everyone.
Yeah, I appreciate this. There's a lot of work that has gone on, I would say, that Jenna and her team have done in the past, month and a half, 2 months, significant amount of work. A lot of good philosophical discussion in my mind around kind of that EV, particularly that EV measure and the on-road EV charger measure or public charging measure. So I think just really a lot that you all have to review and provide feedback on. So I want to give you that time. We have 2 minutes. So if anybody wants to come off mute and say anything, please feel free to do so. But also, like Jenna said, we take feedback in writing anyway. So. And I'm not seeing anybody come off mute, so I think we can end it. Cool. Well, thanks all. We will see you next month, or if not sooner, within a working group. Cool. Bye, all.
Thank you.
Thank you.